The issue of inherited wealth can cause problems when a couple divorces, with disagreements about how and indeed if the inheritance will be divided. Family law partner Liz Allen has helped thousands of couples grapple with these issues. First of all, Liz, how is inherited wealth dealt with in a divorce? Is it treated the same way as other assets to being divided by the couple?
Well, the simple answer is no, it can be treated very differently. But the essential starting point for the courts is 50-50, and then they look at where the wealth came from. So if a lot of wealth was inherited, then it might be retained by the person who inherited it.
So does it matter if the wealth was inherited recently?
It can certainly help if the person wants to retain the wealth, because if they inherited their wealth, say for example, after the separation but before the divorce, it's much more likely that it would be retained than if it was inherited much earlier during the marriage, when it's perhaps more likely to be shared.
And does a couple's standard of living during their marriage impact during the divorce?
Yes, that can make quite a big difference actually, because we look at the standard of living and the needs of the couple. So if, for example, the couple have lived very modestly, that will have relevance. There was a very famous case reported some time ago where the couple, the wife, had inherited a lot of money. She was worth millions of pounds, but they lived like church mice. They really had no great standard of living at all. They had battered cars, old houses. And so when it came to divorce, the husband got a very small share of the wife's inheritance because he couldn't prove that he needed it. He only needed a modest standard of living.
What other factors would lead the court to exclude inherited wealth from the pot of assets being divided on divorce?
The way in which the wealth's been treated is quite a big factor. So say, for example, the wealth has been what we would call mingled into the assets, then it's less likely to be retained. For example, if someone has a large inheritance and they pay off their mortgage on the family home, then they would be very lucky indeed to get that money back again. It's much more likely to be shared. Whereas if the wealth's been kept separate, for example, a large portfolio inherited of shares that's never been mingled into the matrimonial assets, that might be retained, or a valuable painting that's perhaps been in a gallery, that would be retained. So it is important as to the way the wealth's been treated, yes.
How would someone go about protecting an inheritance before a divorce?
Well, it's a very important area in which to take specialist advice. Probably the first port of call would be pre- and post-nuptial agreements, because in that you can protect your wealth very comprehensively, provided the agreements are dealt with correctly. You can also look at trusts, but there are some disadvantages to trusts because there are tax problems very often created by them, so sometimes people want to avoid that. It's really important to keep your wealth separate if you can, so not, as we were discussing earlier, to mingle it into the matrimonial assets, because that's going to lead to the wealth being more likely to be shared. And finally, I suppose, look at actually having clear documentation of the inheritance, so the probate documents to hand and that sort of thing, so you could prove the inheritance took place, which is going to be an important factor.
Your clients must often ask for a prediction of what's going to happen during the divorce. Is it possible to predict the outcome?
Well, the honest answer is no, not completely. But it's possible to have an educated guess, and that's why people go to specialist lawyers such as ourselves, where we've got many years' experience of looking at those issues and can hopefully give realistic guidance on that. But you are still in a discretionary area of the law.
So every case is unique when it comes to inheritance and divorce, but it's really important to seek out specialist legal advice.